Imagine stepping into an old arcade, where the air is thick with nostalgia and the flickering screens cast ghostly shadows. You spot a cabinet labeled Polybius, a game rumored to have the power to manipulate minds and warp reality. As you approach, a chill runs down your spine, and you can't shake the feeling that you're not alone. Will you dare to play, knowing that some players vanished without a trace, their memories consumed by the game? What if Polybius is waiting for you, ready to claim another victim? Chapter 1. The urban legend begins. In the early 1980s, arcades were havens for the young and the restless. Neon lights buzzed overhead as pixelated characters flickered across screens, accompanied by the hypnotic hum of electronic bleeps and bloops. These smoky, dimly lit rooms were filled with the excitement of new gaming experiences, where players competed for the highest scores, their pockets jingling with quarters. But among the colorful array of familiar titles, Pac-Man, Galaga, Space Invaders, there existed whispers of a different kind of game, one that few claimed to have seen, but none could forget: Polybius. According to legend, Polybius appeared unannounced in a few arcades around Portland, Oregon, in 1981. Unlike the other machines that proudly bore logos from well-known companies like Atari or Nintendo, this cabinet was more mysterious, plain black, with no branding, and its name in strange, glowing green letters. It was said to be an experiment, not just a game, created by a shadowy government organization. Its arrival was fleeting, disappearing just as mysteriously as it had come, leaving behind nothing but eerie stories and the occasional haunted recollection from those who claimed to have played it. The tales of Polybius spread like wildfire, first through word of mouth, then across online forums in the nascent days of the internet, where urban legends thrived. Players reported experiencing a disturbing array of side effects after interacting with the machine: intense nausea, nightmares, blackouts, and even seizures. Some said they would lose hours of their day, unable to recall what happened during that time. Others spoke of vivid hallucinations, as if the game had burrowed into their minds, planting images too real to shake. The most unsettling accounts, however, were from those who claimed that after playing Polybius, their lives began to spiral into darkness. Take Brian Morrow, for instance, a Portland native who was 14 at the time. In a now infamous interview, posted years later on a cryptic website, Morrow claimed to have encountered Polybius in a small, run-down arcade on the outskirts of the city. He described the game as unlike anything he had ever played before, a fast-paced shooter with mesmerizing, almost hypnotic visuals. He said he felt compelled to keep playing, drawn in by the way the screen seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, the controls responding almost too perfectly to his touch. It was addictive, Morrow recounted, not in the way other games were. This was different. It was like the game wanted me to keep playing. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. But the excitement quickly turned to dread. After several hours in front of the machine, Morrow began to feel strange. His vision blurred, and he heard a high-pitched tone that no one else seemed to notice. Later that night, he woke in a cold sweat from nightmares he couldn't fully remember. Only fragments of flashing lights and distorted faces remained. In the following days, his behavior grew erratic. He became withdrawn, paranoid, convinced that someone was following him. His school performance plummeted, and soon after, he dropped out completely. Morrow wasn't the only one with such a story. A handful of others shared eerily similar experiences. One player, known only by his online handle, ArcadeMan1981, claimed in a forum post that after playing Polybius, he began suffering from debilitating headaches. Soon after, he started experiencing vivid hallucinations, seeing strange, geometric shapes in his peripheral vision even when he wasn't playing the game. At night, he dreamt of being inside the game, trapped in an endless, shifting maze of neon lights, where distorted voices whispered from unseen corners. By the time he sought medical help, his symptoms had worsened. Doctors dismissed his complaints as stress or lack of sleep, but he knew better. He was convinced that Polybius had done something to him, rewired his brain in a way that he couldn't undo. The physical effects were only part of the story. Several players recounted a terrifying psychological grip the game seemed to have on them. Obsession grew in those who had played it. They couldn't stop thinking about the game, its abstract patterns and symbols, the eerie music that would echo in their minds long after they had left the arcade. In extreme cases, players described a constant, unshakable feeling of being watched, as though the game itself had embedded something sinister into their consciousness. Then, almost as quickly as it had appeared, Polybius vanished. The game cabinets were reportedly removed in the dead of night, and not even the arcade owners seemed to know where they went. Some say government agents, dressed in black suits, driving unmarked cars, came to collect the machines, though no one could offer solid proof. There were no records, no receipts, no traces of Polybius ever existing. It was as though the game had been erased from history, leaving only the chilling memories of those who encountered it. The legend might have faded into obscurity were it not for the rise of the internet in the 1990s, when conspiracy theorists and gaming enthusiasts alike began to dig into the story. On forums like CoinOp and early Reddit threads, Polybius became a topic of intense debate. Some dismissed it as nothing more than an urban myth, a collective hallucination born from the paranoia of the Cold War era, when stories of government mind control experiments like MKUltra were fresh in the public's mind. Others, however, were not so sure. There were simply too many stories, too many eerily similar accounts, for Polybius to be a mere coincidence. Players from different walks of life, none of whom knew each other, shared experiences of the game's sinister effects. Some even claimed to have located old arcade employees who remembered a strange, unmarked machine, though these witnesses often grew silent when pressed for details. To this day, Polybius remains one of the most enduring and unsettling mysteries in gaming lore. The legend has only grown, fueled by internet forums, documentaries, and podcasts. No verified Polybius cabinet has ever been found, and no credible proof has surfaced to confirm its existence. But the testimonies linger, eerie whispers of a game that could do more than entertain, a machine designed to control minds and warp reality. Perhaps Polybius was simply an urban legend born from the collective fear of technological advances. Or perhaps, somewhere in a forgotten arcade or a dusty warehouse, one of those black cabinets still waits, humming quietly, ready to ensnare its next victim. Chapter 2: Mind Control and Subliminal Messages. The story of Polybius takes a darker turn when one considers the possibility that it was more than just a game, that it was a tool for mind control. The idea might seem outlandish at first, but when viewed through the lens of documented government projects like MKUltra, the conspiracy grows disturbingly plausible. The fear that Polybius was designed not to entertain, but to manipulate players' thoughts, implant subliminal messages, and even rewire their brains echoes with eerie familiarity in the annals of real-world psychological experimentation. In the mid-20th century, the U.S. government, particularly through the CIA, engaged in a series of secretive and highly unethical experiments under the banner of MKUltra. This clandestine project sought to explore the boundaries of human consciousness, using a combination of drugs, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and psychological techniques to control or alter an individual's mind. The ultimate goal was to develop mind control methods that could be used against enemies or in covert operations. MKUltra's documented horrors, including the use of unsuspecting test subjects, some of whom suffered severe mental breakdowns, left a scar on the public psyche when the project was eventually exposed in the 1970s. It is within this context of fear and paranoia that the Polybius conspiracy finds fertile ground. Alleged reports of Polybius' hidden messages began circulating shortly after the game's mysterious appearance in Portland arcades in 1981. According to witnesses, the game wasn't just about flashy lights and fast-paced action. It was designed to get inside your head. The visuals, described as mesmerizing and disorienting, often contained rapid flashes of text that appeared for only milliseconds, far too quickly for the conscious mind to register. Players later claimed to have seen these flashes in their peripheral vision, phrases like obey, surrender, and conform. These were messages designed to slip past the brain's defenses, to sink into the subconscious. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a player who went by the handle Iceman in a 2006 internet forum post. He recounted how, After hours of playing Polybius, he began experiencing vivid and terrifying hallucinations. He described seeing images of faces distorted in agony, flashes of unknown symbols, and shadowy figures lurking just beyond the game's pixelated horizon. Worse, these visions didn't end when he stopped playing. For weeks afterward, Eisman reported seeing these hallucinations in his everyday life, while walking down the street, while driving, even in his dreams. The boundaries between the game and reality had blurred, as though Polybius had rewired his brain to see things that weren't there. Such reports were not isolated. Multiple players reported similar psychological disturbances after playing the game. Some began to experience heightened paranoia, convinced that they were being followed or monitored. One anonymous player shared his experience on a cryptography forum in 2003, claiming that after a particularly intense session with Polybius, he became convinced that his phone was tapped and that strangers on the street were watching him. The feeling was inescapable, a constant, oppressive sensation that someone or something was always there, just out of sight. The idea of a video game causing such mental distress might seem far-fetched, but when one considers the very real government interest in psychological manipulation, the picture becomes more ominous. MKUltra's experiments on unwitting participants often involve the use of psychedelic drugs, hypnotic suggestions, and other psychological techniques designed to break down the mind's defenses and reprogram its behavior. One particularly disturbing aspect of these experiments involved the use of subliminal messaging, flashes of images or words too quick for the conscious mind to process, but capable of influencing thoughts and actions. It's not hard to imagine that Polybius, if it existed as described, could have been part of a similar experiment. The technology was certainly there. By the early 1980s, computer graphics and programming were advanced enough to allow for the kind of fast-paced, hypnotic gameplay described by those who allegedly played Polybius. It's plausible that subliminal messaging or visual stimuli could have been embedded in the game's code, designed to influence players in ways they didn't fully understand. There's also a disturbing precedent for such experimentation. In the 1960s, CIA-backed researchers conducted studies in which subjects were exposed to flashing lights, sounds, and hypnotic visuals designed to alter their perception and behavior. These experiments often pushed the limits of human tolerance, inducing confusion, nausea, and paranoia in the participants. Sound familiar? The symptoms described by Polybius players, nausea, headaches, hallucinations, and paranoia, bear a striking resemblance to the documented effects of these government-sanctioned psychological tests. A theory that emerges from this context is that Polybius was a prototype for a new kind of mind control, one that relied not on drugs or hypnosis, but on technology. If MKUltra was a crude attempt at hacking the human brain, Polybius could have been its evolution, a digital experiment designed to test how far electronic stimuli could be used to manipulate consciousness. The game's alleged focus on subliminal messages, combined with its eerie, almost hypnotic visuals, suggests a calculated attempt to see just how deeply a machine could penetrate the mind. What makes the Polybius conspiracy even more disturbing is the lack of verifiable evidence. Like many of MKUltra's victims, who were left mentally shattered with no clear explanation of what had been done to them, those who claim to have played Polybius are often dismissed as paranoid or delusional. The game itself has never been definitively found, leading skeptics to write off the entire story as an urban legend. But the psychological effects described by players are hard to ignore, especially given the documented history of government interest in mind control. In the absence of hard proof, all that remains are the haunting accounts of those who were touched by Polybius. Whether the game was real or just a myth fueled by paranoia, the fear it invokes taps into something very real, the idea that technology can reach into our minds, influencing us in ways we don't fully understand. The concept of subliminal messaging, of hidden forces controlling our thoughts, is one of the deepest fears of the digital age. Polybius, whether it existed as a physical game or just a story, is a reflection of that fear, an eerie reminder that our minds may not be as safe as we believe them to be. As you read these accounts, you may find yourself glancing over your shoulder, wondering if someone or something is watching you. Perhaps that's the most unsettling aspect of Polybius. It suggests that the game never really disappeared. Maybe it's still out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to pull another unsuspecting player into its web. Chapter 3. The Men in Black. One of the most chilling elements of the Polybius myth is the appearance of the mysterious men in black. These figures, dressed in dark, immaculate suits, allegedly monitored the Polybius arcade machines with an unsettling purpose. They did not collect quarters or service the machines, as one might expect. Instead, they came under the cover of darkness, late at night, and seemed more interested in gathering data about the players themselves. Witnesses described these men as emotionless, almost robotic in their demeanor, leaving behind a palpable sense of fear. The connection between Polybius and these ominous figures only deepens the mystery surrounding the game, raising questions about whether it was part of a larger, more sinister operation. Could it have been a covert government experiment? The presence of these men suggests that Polybius may have been more than just a game. It could have been a tool for surveillance and psychological testing. The first reports of these mysterious men surfaced not long after the appearance of the Polybius arcade machines in Portland, Oregon, in 1981. Arcade owners claimed that these men, often traveling in pairs, would visit the establishments in the dead of night. Unlike the regular technicians who serviced the arcade games, these men never touched the machines to make repairs or empty the coin trays. Instead, they seemed to take meticulous notes, carefully observing the machines and, more disturbingly, the players. One Portland arcade owner, who requested anonymity in a 2003 online interview, recounted his unsettling encounters with the men in black. According to the owner, the men would arrive without warning and ask specific questions about the players who had been frequenting the Polybius machine. They wanted to know about the players' behavior, how long they played, and whether any had shown signs of distress or obsession. The owner found their questions odd but complied, believing them to be part of some official organization monitoring the machines for legitimate reasons. However, the behavior of these men was anything but normal. Several witnesses described them as cold and detached, their movements stiff and calculated, as if they were following a precise protocol. Their faces were expressionless, devoid of any emotion, and they spoke in flat, monotone voices. Some arcade workers who encountered these figures later reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread during these interactions, an inexplicable fear that lingered long after the men had left. In several cases, the visits from the men in black preceded the disappearance of the Polybius machines. Witnesses reported that the machines would suddenly vanish without a trace, as if they had never existed. No explanation was given, and the arcade owners who tried to investigate were met with dead ends. The machines seemed to be wiped from existence, leaving only the disturbing memories of those who had played them. Some theorists believe that the men in black were collecting data not just on the game, but on the psychological and physiological effects it had on its players. This theory aligns with the idea that Polybius was part of a covert government project, possibly linked to experiments in mind control and behavior modification. Given the historical context of the time, especially the exposure of classified projects like MKUltra, in which the CIA conducted illegal experiments on human subjects, it isn't difficult to imagine Polybius as a tool for psychological testing. What makes the connection even more unsettling are the accounts from those who claim they were followed or harassed by these men after playing the game. In one case, documented in an early 2000s online forum, a player recounted how, after spending several hours playing Polybius, he began to notice a black sedan parked outside his home. At first, he dismissed it as a coincidence, but the car seemed to follow him wherever he went. Even more disturbingly, he recalled seeing men in dark suits watching him from across the street. Their presence was unnerving, silent, unblinking, and ever-present. After a week of being shadowed, the men vanished just as suddenly as they had appeared. The question remains, who were these men in black, and what were they after? Theories abound, but the most common explanation is that they were government agents. The appearance of these figures in connection with Polybius fits the classic pattern of covert government involvement, particularly when viewed in the context of the Cold War era. During the late 20th century, paranoia about surveillance and government experiments was at an all-time high, fueled by revelations about operations like MKUltra, where the CIA conducted secret mind control experiments on unsuspecting citizens. Could Polybius have been part of a similar experiment? Some believe that the game was designed not only to manipulate players' minds, but to collect data on how they responded to specific stimuli. The Men in Black may have been tasked with gathering this data, monitoring players for signs of psychological changes or unusual behavior. Their cold, emotionless demeanor suggests that they were not just technicians but operatives, carefully trained to observe without interfering. The involvement of government agencies, particularly intelligence organizations like the CIA or NSA, is not beyond the realm of possibility. During the Cold War, the U.S. government was deeply invested in research on psychological warfare and mind control, spurred by fears that foreign powers were developing similar technologies. The Men in Black, with their precision and detachment, fit the profile of agents engaged in such a mission, gathering intelligence, assessing the effects of Polybius on players, and disappearing without a trace once their work was done. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Men in Black is the lingering sense of fear and paranoia they left behind. Numerous players reported feeling as though they were being watched or followed after their interactions with the game. Some claimed that they received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, where the only sound was static or faint breathing. Others reported strange men appearing at their workplaces or homes, asking cryptic questions about their experiences with Polybius. One former player, who shared his experience on a conspiracy forum in 2004, described being approached by two men in dark suits just days after he had played Polybius. The men asked him detailed questions about his gameplay, how long he had played, how he felt during and after the game, and whether he had experienced any side effects. The player, unnerved by their cold demeanor, asked who they were. The men refused to answer, and when he pressed them further, they simply walked away without another word. In the days that followed, the player began to notice strange things. Objects in his home moved, his phone clicking with interference, and most disturbingly, a growing sense that someone was watching him. The Men in Black remain one of the most frightening aspects of the Polybius mystery, adding an element of government conspiracy and surveillance to an already disturbing legend. Whether they were real agents or figments of paranoia, their presence in the story leaves a haunting question. Who was really behind Polybius, and what were they trying to achieve? Chapter 4. The Fatal Side Effects. The legend of Polybius takes a disturbing turn when the stories of its alleged victims emerge. Those who claim to have played the game describe not just an addictive experience, but one with devastating, life-altering consequences. According to various accounts, players suffered from severe insomnia, intense headaches, and frightening hallucinations, with some falling into a downward spiral that ended in mysterious deaths or disappearances. These unsettling reports have fueled speculation that the game was far more than it seemed, a malevolent experiment that destroyed those who dared to play it for too long. Many of the most troubling accounts associated with Polybius involve players who experienced intense physical and psychological side effects after playing the game. One of the most common complaints was insomnia. Players would report sleepless nights, plagued by strange, vivid dreams that left them exhausted and on edge. These dreams, often described as flashing images of geometric patterns and disembodied voices, bore an eerie resemblance to the hypnotic visuals of the game itself. Over time, the insomnia worsened, leading to a breakdown in mental health. In a case documented on an early gaming forum in the late 1990s, a man claimed that after playing Polybius in a Portland arcade, he began to suffer from terrible headaches and disturbing visual distortions. He would see flashes of bright light in the corners of his vision, and his perception of reality would warp, as though the world around him were being rendered in the same blocky graphics of the game. At night, the visions grew more intense, leaving him too terrified to sleep. His story is echoed by others who reported similar symptoms: fainting spells, disorientation, and even seizures. Medical professionals who encountered some of these players diagnosed them with stress-related conditions or epilepsy, but the victims themselves insisted it was something far more insidious. They were convinced that the game was rewiring their brains, subtly altering their perception of the world. Some claim they heard voices, whispers in the back of their minds, urging them to keep playing, to return to the game. These whispers, according to one player's account, grew louder the more time they spent away from the arcade, creating a compulsion to play again that was almost impossible to resist. The most haunting stories tied to Polybius are those in which players became completely consumed by the game, their obsession leading to their untimely demise. These stories, often passed down through online forums and whispers among the gaming community, suggest a darker truth beneath the urban legend. One such story involves a teenager who, after becoming obsessed with the game, seemingly vanished without a trace. In 1981, a boy named Brian was reported missing by his parents in Portland, Oregon, just weeks after his friend said he had been spending hours playing Polybius at a local arcade. Brian's behavior had changed in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He had become withdrawn, irritable, and fixated on returning to the game. His friends recalled how he would talk about strange visions he saw while playing, as if the game were showing him hidden messages meant only for him. One night, Brian simply didn't come home. His family searched for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. To this day, his case remains unsolved, and those who knew him believe the game had something to do with his disappearance. Another tragic case involves a young man named Michael Lopez, whose story was shared by a former classmate on an online conspiracy forum in 2002. According to the account, Michael had been an avid gamer in the early 80s and was particularly drawn to Polybius. His friends noticed he became increasingly agitated and paranoid after playing the game for several hours one weekend. He spoke of feeling like someone was watching him, not just in the arcade, but everywhere he went. Michael's mental state deteriorated rapidly. His once outgoing and cheerful demeanor turned into one of fear and confusion. Just a month after his obsession with Polybius began, Michael was found dead in his apartment. His death was ruled a suicide, though some who knew him believed it was the result of something far darker. The local authorities treated it as an isolated incident, but rumors persisted that his death was connected to the game. One of the most troubling aspects of the Polybius legend is the alleged cover-up surrounding these incidents. The deaths and disappearances of players were either ignored or quietly brushed aside by local authorities, leaving behind little to no trace of official records. Families of the victims reportedly faced obstacles when trying to investigate the circumstances surrounding their loved ones' deaths, and in some cases, they were met with strange resistance from authorities who seemed unusually eager to close the cases. One notable example involves the case of a Portland arcade owner who recalled the disappearance of a Polybius machine from his establishment after a player suffered a seizure while playing it. According to the owner, within days of the incident, a group of men, believed to be government agents, arrived at the arcade and removed the machine without explanation. When the owner attempted to inquire further, he was met with vague, evasive answers, and soon after, the story of the seizure was erased from local news reports, as if it had never happened. This eerie pattern of erasing public record only deepened suspicions that there was something more nefarious at play. Similarly, those who tried to track down information on other players who had fallen victim to Polybius met dead ends. Newspaper archives from the early 80s seemed to lack any mention of these cases, and online searches for obituaries or missing person reports connected to known victims yield suspiciously few results. It's as though the lives of those affected by the game were deliberately wiped from the public eye, leaving only fragmented stories passed down through conspiracy theorists and online communities. The unsettling possibility that Polybius could have been responsible for the deaths and disappearances of its players lingers in the minds of those who have studied the legend. While there is no concrete evidence to prove the game was directly linked to these incidents, the eerie patterns and haunting personal stories paint a picture of something far more malevolent than just an arcade machine. Whether these players were the victims of a psychological experiment gone wrong, or whether the game itself harbored something far more sinister, remains unknown. What is clear, however, is that those who dared to play Polybius were left to grapple with the darkest of consequences, and for some, the cost was their very lives. The legend of Polybius serves as a chilling reminder that some games may demand more from their players than just their quarters. They may demand their sanity, or even their soul. Chapter 5. Searching for the Lost Cabinet. The mystery of Polybius, whether it was ever real or simply a well-crafted urban legend, has captivated a generation of truth seekers, conspiracy theorists, and paranormal investigators. This chapter plunges into the modern-day hunt for the infamous arcade cabinet, where the search for the lost game blurs the lines between reality and obsession. Those who pursue Polybius often speak of it as though it possesses a mind of its own, lurking in the shadows, tantalizingly out of reach. As the legend grows, so do the eerie consequences for those who chase after it. The search for Polybius begins where it was said to have first appeared, Portland, Oregon. Over the decades, urban explorers and gaming enthusiasts have scoured the remains of long-abandoned arcades and dusty storage facilities, looking for any clue that the mysterious game once existed. These locations, relics of the 1980s golden age of gaming, have taken on a haunted quality, filled with the ghosts of forgotten quarters and broken joysticks. But for those who believe in Polybius, these places hold darker secrets. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a group of paranormal researchers who, in 2011, claimed to have located an arcade warehouse on the outskirts of Portland. According to their story, this facility housed old, decommissioned machines, many of which were covered in decades of dust. In a far corner, they found an unmarked cabinet, its screen dark and its controls unresponsive. Though no identifying logos or branding were present, the dimensions of the cabinet matched descriptions of Polybius from the legend. When they attempted to power the machine, it remained inert, but several members of the team reported feeling lightheaded and nauseous, as if the mere presence of the game exerted a physical toll. Soon after, the machine vanished from the warehouse, and attempts to relocate the facility led to dead ends, as if it had never existed at all. Occasionally, whispers of Polybius cabinets surface in the most unlikely places, private collections, obscure auction sites, or dark web forums. These brief appearances always spark a frenzy of speculation, but just as quickly as they emerge, the machines vanish, leaving behind only questions and frustration. In one such case, an anonymous user on a retro gaming forum posted photographs of what appeared to be a Polybius machine in early 2013. The images showed a plain, black cabinet with no visible logos or markings, and the poster claimed to have acquired it from an estate sale of an arcade owner in Portland. The user promised to upload footage of the game being played, but before they could do so, their account was deleted and the thread vanished from the forum's archive. Some users claimed the forum itself went offline briefly during this period, suggesting foul play or a deliberate attempt to erase the evidence. Despite multiple attempts to contact the original poster, they were never heard from again. Such occurrences are not uncommon. Reports of Polybius cabinets appearing on auction sites often end with the listing abruptly pulled or the buyer disappearing from the community entirely. It's as if the game doesn't want to be found, or perhaps, more disturbingly, those behind its creation are ensuring that it stays hidden. For modern-day investigators, the internet is both a blessing and a curse. While it allows for collaboration and the exchange of information across the globe, it's also home to misinformation and false leads. Nevertheless, the deeper one digs into the digital world, the more unsettling the findings become. There are persistent rumors of Polybius code being discovered in the hidden depths of the dark web. In 2017, a group of cyber researchers claimed to have found fragments of arcade game data, buried within an encrypted file on a deep web forum dedicated to lost media. According to their analysis, the code contained strange patterns that didn't align with any known game from the era, leading to speculation that it could be the long-lost Polybius. However, attempts to decrypt the entire file were unsuccessful, and the forum itself went offline shortly after the discovery was made public. Adding to the intrigue, there are reports of cryptic messages and strange symbols appearing on certain deep web forums whenever Polybius is mentioned. These messages, often composed of random strings of characters or obscure code, seem to serve as warnings or perhaps bait. One investigator, using the pseudonym Arcade Ghost, claimed to have followed these messages to a hidden server where a virtual recreation of Polybius could be played. According to his account, the game ran for a few moments before his screen was flooded with disturbing images, distorted faces, flashes of text in an unknown language, and pulsating shapes that seemed to induce vertigo. Arcade Ghost logged off immediately, but not before receiving an email from an unknown sender containing nothing but the words, "Stop looking." He abandoned the search soon after, but others haven't been so lucky. The deeper people dig into the Polybius legend, the more consuming the search becomes. Investigators speak of feeling a growing compulsion, as if the game itself has embedded its tendrils into their minds. Some claim that their dreams have been infiltrated by images of the game, flashes of its rumored hypnotic gameplay, numbers swirling in black and green, and faceless figures watching from the shadows. These dreams are often accompanied by physical symptoms, headaches, nausea, and a sense of paranoia that doesn't go away even after they wake. There are those who have dropped out of the search entirely, their lives upended by what they've uncovered, or what they believe they've uncovered. In one chilling case, a researcher named Todd Martin disappeared after publicly declaring that he had located an authentic Polybius cabinet. Before vanishing, Martin had posted a series of cryptic tweets suggesting that he was being followed and that someone had broken into his home. His final message simply read, "It's real. I'm sorry." He hasn't been heard from since. What drives people to search for Polybius? Is it a desire to uncover the truth behind one of the most infamous urban legends of the gaming world? Or is there something more sinister at play? As the years go by, the obsession with Polybius only seems to grow, pulling in new investigators, urban explorers, and conspiracy theorists. Yet, the more people look, the less they find, as if the game is always just out of reach, waiting for its next victim. As the search for the lost cabinet continues, one thing is certain: Polybius will never stop haunting those who seek it. And perhaps it's the most terrifying part of all. Some games are meant to stay hidden. Chapter 6: Polybius in Pop Culture. The legend of Polybius has evolved far beyond the dark corners of 1980s arcade culture. What started as a whispered urban myth has wormed its way into the fabric of pop culture, becoming one of the most enduring and unsettling tales of technological paranoia. In this chapter, we explore how Polybius has been immortalized in documentaries, horror films, television shows, and internet forums, constantly reshaping itself for new generations. The myth taps into deep-seated fears about government control, surveillance, and the darker side of technology, making it a symbol of the unknown and the unknowable. Polybius' journey from a local rumor in Portland to a global phenomenon began in the early days of the internet, where forums and chat rooms became breeding grounds for urban legends. The game represented everything people feared about technology in the late 20th century: mind control, psychological manipulation, and hidden agendas. The explosion of conspiracy culture in the 1990s, fueled by shows like The X-Files, gave new life to Polybius. As government documents detailing real projects like MKUltra came to light, the line between myth and reality blurred. MKUltra, the CIA's infamous mind control program, had proven that secret government experiments on unwitting subjects were not only possible, but had already happened. This fed directly into the Polybius myth, turning the game from a simple haunted arcade cabinet into a symbol of government overreach and psychological experimentation. The idea that a video game could be used as a tool for mind control resonated deeply with a society increasingly paranoid about how technology was being used to monitor and manipulate them. Television and film, mediums with the power to amplify fear, have helped cement Polybius as a cornerstone of modern conspiracy lore. One of the earliest mainstream references to the game came in a 2006 episode of The Simpsons, where an arcade cabinet labeled Polybius is briefly shown with the words "property of U.S. government" emblazoned on its screen. The gag was a nod to the growing popularity of the legend among internet conspiracy theorists, but it also signaled the moment when Polybius stepped into the realm of mainstream pop culture. From there, Polybius has been featured in numerous documentaries, including those exploring video game urban legends and secret government projects. One particularly chilling segment in a 2017 documentary about dark gaming myths suggested that Polybius was just one of many experiments involving subliminal messaging in arcade games during the early 1980s. While no concrete evidence was presented, The mere suggestion that such experiments could have occurred was enough to send shivers down the spines of viewers. Horror films have also embraced the legend. In the 2015 horror movie Beneath the Screen, the plot revolves around a cursed arcade game that drives players mad, leading to hallucinations, paranoia, and death. Though the film never explicitly names Polybius, its influence is clear. The film's viral marketing campaign played on the idea that a lost, dangerous game could resurface at any moment, bringing terror and obsession with it. The film sparked renewed interest in Polybius online, with users across the globe delving into forums and YouTube channels, seeking any trace of the game. In the digital age, Polybius has become a staple of internet horror, particularly in the realm of creepypasta. These user-generated horror stories, shared on sites like Reddit and 4chan, thrive on the boundary between fiction and reality. Polybius fits perfectly into this world. As the legend spread, people began posting their own fictionalized accounts of encountering the game, describing how it warped their minds and lives. These stories, blending fact with fiction, became impossible to fully debunk, creating a feedback loop that has kept the Polybius myth alive for decades. One particularly disturbing creepypasta, which circulated heavily in the early 2010s, described a user who found an old Polybius machine in the basement of a shuttered arcade. According to the story, the game's screen flickered with cryptic images and messages in binary code. After playing it for several hours, the user claimed to experience vivid hallucinations, including visions of government agents and shadowy figures watching him. His final post on the forum ominously read, "They're here. I shouldn't have looked." Though it was dismissed as fictional by most, the story echoed many real-life accounts of players who supposedly experienced similar effects after interacting with the game, further blurring the line between reality and legend. At the heart of Polybius' lasting impact is the pervasive fear of technological manipulation. As governments, corporations, and hackers gain increasing control over the digital landscape, Polybius serves as a chilling reminder of how technology can be used against us. The game has become a symbol of the modern age's distrust in surveillance and data collection, themes that resonate deeply in an era where people are constantly monitored by their smartphones, social media accounts, and online activities. This paranoia is reflected in recent documentaries and video essays on YouTube, where creators analyze the Polybius myth in the context of contemporary concerns about technology. These videos explore the idea that if something like Polybius didn't exist in the 1980s, it could very easily exist today, in the form of addictive mobile games, social media algorithms, or virtual reality simulations designed to shape behavior in ways we don't fully understand. The horror of Polybius lies not in what it was, but in what it represents: the potential for technology to become a tool of control, hidden in plain sight. As the legend of Polybius grows, so too does its influence on new generations, many of whom were not even alive during the era of arcade gaming. For these younger audiences, Polybius represents a bridge between the past and present, a forgotten relic of a time when video games were seen as mysterious, almost magical portals to unknown worlds. In the age of digital conspiracy culture, Polybius has taken on new dimensions, with forums and YouTube channels dedicated to uncovering its secrets. These modern investigators, armed with advanced technology and a deep sense of curiosity, continue to search for the truth behind the game. They scour digital archives, search for old game code, and dive into dark web forums, hoping to uncover the elusive Polybius cabinet or at least find some proof of its existence. For many, the search itself has become an obsession, as if the game's legend is feeding on their curiosity, much like the game is rumored to have fed on its players in the 1980s. Chapter 7. The game that never was, or was it? The legend of Polybius stands at the crossroads of myth and reality, where shadows loom and answers remain elusive. The tale began in the arcades of 1980s Portland, Oregon, innocent enough on the surface, but increasingly sinister as rumors spread of a game that manipulated minds, destroyed lives, and perhaps never truly existed. As we conclude this investigation, we must ask, was Polybius merely an elaborate urban legend spun from the fears of a paranoid era, or was there something far more dangerous lurking behind the pixels? For skeptics, Polybius is a prime example of how myths can spiral out of control. The narrative has all the ingredients of a classic urban legend: vague sources, eerie coincidences, and just enough plausibility to make it seem real. Critics argue that if Polybius had existed, there would be more concrete evidence, actual machines, game footage, or credible witnesses who could testify to its reality. One of the most damning pieces of evidence against the existence of Polybius is the lack of any verifiable record of the game in historical arcade databases. Even with thorough searches, no credible collector or arcade historian has ever found a Polybius cabinet. Furthermore, the supposed release of the game by the mysterious company Sinneslöschen raises red flags. No records of this company exist, and the name itself feels more like an ominous pseudonym than a legitimate business. Another key factor in debunking Polybius is its connection to the rise of internet culture. The story first gained traction in the early 2000s, when websites like coinop.org posted brief mentions of the game. Many argue that Polybius grew out of early internet conspiracy forums, where users created and spread urban legends for fun. To them, the game is nothing more than a viral meme from the early days of online culture, enhanced by the mystery and fear surrounding government surveillance, MKUltra, and mind control experiments. Yet for every skeptic, there's a believer, a person convinced that Polybius is more than just a myth. They point to circumstantial evidence that suggests something strange was indeed happening in arcades in the early 1980s. Some accounts come from players who describe odd sensations after playing certain arcade games, from headaches and nausea to more severe psychological disturbances. While these symptoms could be attributed to flashing lights and the intensity of early video games, some believe there's more to the story. Then there are the reports of people who went missing after becoming obsessed with the game. Though none of these stories can be directly linked to Polybius, some believers point to local disappearances in Portland as potential signs that something was wrong. One chilling example often referenced is the case of a teenage boy named Brian Morrow, who supposedly became obsessed with an arcade game in 1981 and vanished shortly after. While it's impossible to confirm whether he played Polybius, the eerie connection fuels the legend. The most compelling argument for believers is the striking similarity between Polybius and real government experiments like MKUltra. The U.S. government's secret mind control program involved psychological manipulation, drug testing, and sensory deprivation on unsuspecting citizens. These experiments were confirmed through declassified documents, showing that such projects were not only possible, but had been active during the same era as the alleged release of Polybius. Could the game have been part of a similar experiment, perhaps testing subliminal messages and psychological conditioning on a younger, more vulnerable population? Even today, the Polybius story refuses to die. Despite the lack of definitive proof, occasional reports emerge from various parts of the world claiming that a Polybius cabinet has been found. These stories are always fleeting, mysterious arcade cabinets that appear in obscure locations only to vanish just as quickly. In one particularly unsettling case, a man named Jeff Daly reportedly came across a Polybius cabinet in 2015, hidden in the back of an old arcade storage unit in Chicago. Daly claimed that the game had no traditional markings or labels, just a blank black box with the faintest remnants of a screen burned into it. After attempting to restore it, Daly reported seeing strange patterns flash across the screen. He grew obsessed with the game, describing how he felt like it was alive, subtly controlling his thoughts. But before he could share more about his experience, the cabinet was stolen or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Daly has not been heard from since. These stories, though unverified, add fuel to the fire of the Polybius legend. For every person who dismisses the game as a hoax, another is convinced that it's real, hidden away in some dark corner, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In the end, Polybius occupies a unique space in the world of urban legends and conspiracy theories. Unlike many other myths, it cannot be fully debunked, nor can it be proven beyond doubt. The pieces of the puzzle are scattered: vague memories, blurry photos, and hazy accounts that never quite fit together. Yet the lack of conclusive evidence only makes the legend more terrifying. In the space between fact and fiction, Polybius thrives. The story plays into our deepest fears of being watched, manipulated, and controlled. It suggests that the things we enjoy most, like video games, could be used against us in sinister ways. Whether Polybius was a real arcade game or not almost doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the impact it has had on our collective psyche. As recently as 2023, a disturbing report surfaced from a small, forgotten arcade in a rural town in Arizona. According to the account, a dilapidated Polybius cabinet was found in the back of an old arcade that had been closed for decades. A group of teenagers, excited by the find, managed to power it up, but after playing for only a few minutes, one of them began to experience severe hallucinations. She claimed to see men in black suits watching her from the arcade entrance. The cabinet disappeared the next day, along with the arcade owner who had allowed the kids inside. The girl was found wandering the desert days later, mumbling incoherently about a game that wanted to be played. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't prove, but we can't disprove either.